Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges our way, doesn't it? One moment, everything seems to be falling into place, and the next, we're standing at a crossroads with no clear direction. It's in those moments, when life doesn't go as planned, that we often feel lost, uncertain, and overwhelmed. But what if I told you that even in the midst of uncertainty, there's a powerful source of strength waiting for us? What if the answer isn't in figuring it all out on our own, but in turning to a greater power? Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of bringing your needs to God, especially when life feels like it's unraveling. Because when things don't go as planned, that's exactly when we need to trust that God's plan is greater than anything we could imagine. Life often unfolds in ways we least expect. We make plans, set goals, and invest time and energy into pursuing dreams, only to find that the journey doesn't always align with our expectations. The road is bumpy, the direction unclear, and the outcome uncertain. It's natural to want to feel in control, to have a sense of certainty, and to believe that our efforts will lead to specific results. Yet no matter how hard we try, life doesn't always cooperate. In those moments of confusion, pain, or loss, it's easy to feel lost. The very thing we counted on to give us direction, our understanding, our plans, has failed us. We question ourselves, wondering why things turned out this way, and we question our purpose as the future seems uncertain and clouded. In such moments, it's easy to feel isolated in our struggles, like we are the only ones facing these feelings of confusion, fear, and vulnerability. However, these are the very moments when the invitation from God is at its most powerful. God does not expect us to always be strong, perfect, or unshaken in the face of adversity. In fact, God calls us to bring our whole selves before Him, including our doubts, our confusion, and our vulnerability. He does not desire a relationship built on pretenses or facades. He wants us to come as we are, raw, real, and ready to be loved despite our brokenness. This invitation is not just a suggestion. It is an essential part of the spiritual journey. Acknowledge that it's okay to feel lost and uncertain. When life doesn't go as planned, we tend to experience emotions that feel foreign and overwhelming. We may feel as though we have failed or that we are inadequate in some way. There's a weight that comes with uncertainty, and it often leads to feelings of guilt or shame. We might believe that as people of faith, we are supposed to have everything together, to exude confidence and positivity even when the going gets tough. We might think that admitting vulnerability equates to weakness or lack of faith, but in reality, the opposite is true. God invites us into a space where our vulnerability is not a sign of failure, but a demonstration of trust in His grace. It's in the moments when we feel lost, when we have no idea which way to go, that God's grace becomes most evident. It's in the act of being honest with God about our fears, our uncertainties, and our desires that we open ourselves to the profound healing and guidance He offers. Vulnerability with God is not a sign of weakness, but an invitation to deepen our relationship with Him. It's an acknowledgement that we are human, that we are not self-sufficient, and that we need His guidance to navigate the stormy seas of life. God understands our human limitations. In fact, He created us with the capacity to feel, to experience, and to be deeply affected by the world around us. Our emotions, though sometimes painful, are not something God seeks to suppress or diminish. They are part of the intricate design of who we are. God invites us to feel deeply, to be touched by joy, pain, loss, and confusion. But He also invites us to bring these feelings to Him, trusting that He is the only one who can truly provide peace and clarity in the midst of them. Being honest with God about our feelings of being lost does not diminish His sovereignty. Rather, it affirms His love and care for us. It's in these moments of rawness that we begin to realize that God has always been present with us, even when we couldn't see Him. He has been waiting for us to acknowledge our need for Him, to invite Him into the broken places of our hearts, and when we do, we begin to experience the kind of intimacy with God that transforms our lives. Not by providing immediate answers or solutions to our problems, but by providing His presence, His peace, and His love. In our culture, there is often a tendency to avoid showing vulnerability. We are encouraged to be strong, to put on a brave face, and to keep moving forward, no matter what. There's a stigma around showing weakness, especially when it comes to matters of faith. We fear that if we admit to struggling, we'll be judged or worse, seen as less than others. We can feel ashamed of our human frailties and wish to hide them even from God. But God's word tells us something profoundly different. In Psalm 34:18, we are reminded that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. This verse doesn't say that God is only close to those who have it all together or who are putting on a perfect front. It says he is near to the brokenhearted. He is near to those who are struggling, those who feel lost and unsure. When we acknowledge our vulnerabilities and bring our brokenness to God, we create a space for his healing presence to enter in. There's a difference between vulnerability with God and vulnerability with others. With others, we may fear judgment or rejection, but with God, we can be fully honest and know that we are safe in his arms. When we bring our uncertainties to him, he doesn't criticize or scold us. He doesn't turn away in frustration or impatience. Instead, he listens. He understands. He meets us where we are, not where we think we should be. In his eyes, our vulnerability is not a sign of failure, but a sign of faith, a trust that he is able to handle our deepest struggles. The act of bringing our uncertainties to God is also an act of surrender. It's an admission that we don't have all the answers, that we don't have control over everything, and that we need God's wisdom to guide us. It's a recognition that his perspective is infinitely greater than our own, and that when life doesn't go as planned, he still has a purpose that we may not fully understand yet. This surrender allows us to step into a space of peace and acceptance, knowing that we don't have to have everything figured out. We simply have to trust that God is good, that he is in control, and that he is leading us even when the path seems unclear. In the Bible, many great men and women of faith expressed their vulnerability before God. Moses, when called by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, expressed doubt and fear, asking God, "Who am I to lead these people?" Elijah, after a great victory over the prophets of Baal, fled in fear and despair, asking God to take his life. King David, a man after God's own heart, wrote countless psalms filled with raw emotion, asking God why he felt distant, expressing fear, pain, and a longing for God's presence. These great leaders were not rebuked for their vulnerability. Instead, they were met with God's compassion, his guidance, and his strength. Our vulnerability is also an opportunity for growth. When we acknowledge our uncertainties and lay them before God, we open ourselves up to transformation. God does not leave us in our brokenness. He works within us to shape us into the people he has called us to be. Our weaknesses become the places where his strength is made perfect, and our vulnerabilities become the avenues through which his grace is poured out in our lives. Acknowledging that it's okay to feel lost and uncertain also means that we embrace the journey. The journey of faith is not always smooth or predictable. It is often marked by seasons of doubt, struggle, and unanswered questions. But these seasons are not meaningless. They are part of God's refining process. It's in the wilderness moments that we learn to trust him more deeply, to lean on him more fully, and to experience his faithfulness in ways that we could not in the moments of certainty. The reality is that life doesn't always go as planned, and we will face moments of confusion and pain. But it is in these moments that we are invited to turn to God, to be honest about our feelings, and to find comfort in his presence. He welcomes our vulnerability. He listens to our cries, and he promises to guide us through every season of life. When we come before God, acknowledging our lostness and uncertainty, we are not met with judgment or disappointment. We are met with the love, grace, and wisdom of a Father who cares deeply for us. Life is a journey that is never as predictable as we would like it to be. We make plans, we set goals, we put our hearts into our dreams, believing that if we work hard enough, we will achieve everything we envision. However, as we go through life, we quickly realize that things don't always go as planned. We encounter detours, setbacks, and unexpected obstacles that challenge our sense of direction and purpose. The plans we once thought were clear and achievable suddenly seem impossible, and the path we thought was paved before us becomes clouded and uncertain. In these moments, it's easy to feel discouraged, lost, and confused. We question the purpose of our struggles, the meaning of our pain, and wonder if God has forgotten us. But it is precisely in these moments of uncertainty and disappointment that we are called to trust that God has a purpose and a plan greater than our own. It can be hard to understand this when we are in the midst of pain or confusion, but trusting in God's greater plan is a fundamental aspect of the Christian faith. We are reminded time and again throughout Scripture that God's ways are higher than our ways, and His understanding is beyond our comprehension. What we see as setbacks, detours, or failures might in fact be part of a larger picture that God is painting in our lives, one that we cannot fully see from our limited perspective. One of the most profound aspects of faith is learning to trust in God's timing, even when it doesn't align with our own. We often feel like we need to have everything figured out now, or that our plans should unfold immediately according to our desires. But God's purpose in our lives is rarely about instant gratification. His plans are eternal, and they unfold over time in ways that we may not always recognize or understand. He sees the big picture while we often see only the pieces that are right in front of us. This is something that we see exemplified in the stories of countless individuals throughout the Bible. Take, for example, the story of Joseph. Joseph's life was filled with twists and turns that defied logic and seemed to go against everything he had dreamed for his life. As a young man, he had a vision of his brothers bowing down to him, a vision that seemed to promise greatness and honor. Instead of being ushered into leadership, Joseph found himself betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. He went through years of suffering and isolation, all the while trying to hold on to his faith that God had a purpose for his life. From a human perspective, it seemed as though Joseph's dreams would never come to fruition. It seemed as though God had forgotten him, or worse, was punishing him for some unknown reason. But in the fullness of time, Joseph's story revealed that God had been orchestrating every step of his journey, preparing him to be the very one who would save his family from famine and bring about the deliverance of the entire nation of Israel. Joseph himself recognized this when he said to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that even when things don't go as we planned, God's purpose is always greater. What we may see as setbacks, disappointments, or failures are often stepping stones towards something far more significant than we could ever imagine. Similarly, consider the story of the Apostle Paul. Before he became a passionate preacher of the gospel, Paul, then known as Saul, was one of the most notorious persecutors of Christians. He was zealous in his mission to stamp out the early Christian movement, believing that he was doing the will of God. However, on the road to Damascus, Saul encountered a life-altering vision of Jesus Christ. His entire world was turned upside down in an instant. He was struck blind, and for 3 days, he was left in complete darkness. This experience was a profound interruption of his plans, and one could easily imagine that Paul might have questioned the purpose of such a radical and painful turn of events. Yet in that moment of brokenness and vulnerability, God revealed his greater plan. Saul's blindness was not a punishment. It was a moment of spiritual awakening that would ultimately lead to his transformation into Paul, one of the most influential apostles in the history of the church. Paul's story is a testimony to the fact that even the most difficult and confusing moments can be part of God's perfect plan. What seemed like a tragic interruption in his life was, in fact, the very thing that would bring him closer to the purpose God had for him. Paul would go on to preach the gospel, plant churches, and write much of the New Testament, impacting generations of Christians who followed. Had Paul not experienced that moment of interruption and transformation, the course of Christian history would have been profoundly different. We also see examples of trusting in God's greater plan in the lives of figures like David, Esther, and even Jesus himself. David, chosen by God to be king, went through years of fleeing from Saul, enduring hardships and trials that seemed to have no end. Yet God was using these years of struggle to prepare David for the kingship he had promised. Esther, a young Jewish woman who was thrust into the Persian king's palace, faced an uncertain future as she navigated the complex political landscape. Yet through her faith and courage, she became the key to saving the Jewish people from destruction. And of course, Jesus, though he was the Son of God, experienced unimaginable suffering, betrayal, and death. In his moment of deepest despair, he cried out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Yet in that moment of seeming abandonment, God was working out the greatest purpose the world has ever known, bringing salvation to humanity through the sacrifice of his Son. These stories and many others in the Bible reveal a consistent theme. God's purposes are greater than our own. Even when things don't go as we planned, even when we encounter suffering, loss, or confusion, we are called to trust that God is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events in ways that we cannot always see or understand. His plans are not limited by our understanding, and His timing is perfect even when it doesn't align with our own sense of urgency or expectation. What may seem like a detour or a delay may actually be God's way of preparing us for something far greater than we could have imagined. Trusting that God has a purpose and a plan greater than our own requires a deep surrender of our own desires and control. It means recognizing that no matter how much we try to steer the course of our lives, we are ultimately not in control. Our plans are limited, but God's plans are infinite. His wisdom and knowledge far surpass ours, and He sees the entire picture of our lives from beginning to end. We may only see a small piece of the puzzle, but God sees how each piece fits together to create a masterpiece. Surrendering our plans to God doesn't mean giving up on our dreams or desires. It means trusting that God is the ultimate author of our story, and that He has a good and perfect plan for our lives. It means recognizing that His plans are not always the same as ours, but that they are always better. When we surrender to God's will, we are saying, I trust you, Lord, even when I don't understand. I trust that you know what's best for me, and I believe that you are working all things together for my good. This trust is not always easy. There will be times when we struggle with doubt, fear, and confusion. There will be moments when we feel like giving up, when the weight of disappointment seems too heavy to bear. But even in those moments, we can take comfort in the fact that God's purpose is always greater than our own. He is faithful, and His plans are good. In times of uncertainty, we are called to lean on God's promises. We are reminded that He works all things together for the good of those who love Him, Romans 8:28, and that His thoughts toward us are thoughts of peace, not evil, to give us a future and a hope, Jeremiah 29:11. When things don't go as planned, we are called to trust that God is still in control, that He is still working in our lives, and that He will bring about His perfect plan in His perfect timing. It is in the moments when life doesn't go as we plan that we are given the opportunity to truly rely on God. It is in those moments that our faith is tested, refined, and strengthened. And when we trust in God's greater plan, we begin to see that what we once thought was a setback is actually a setup for something far greater than we could have imagined.